my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello, BYWG Podcast Tribe. This is Dr. Noah. For the month of April 2019, the book of the month is Kate Northrup's new release, Do Less, a revolutionary approach to time and energy management for the busy mom. And the product of the month is BYWG's very own Probiotic Power supplement, which is available with the 10% discount code Probiotic Power 10. Folks, it's case sensitive, so it's capital PROBIOTIC, capital POWER 10. As a reminder, as always, all the links for the product of the month and the book of the month will be listed in the show notes in iTunes, in our weekly newsletter, and on our website at www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com at the Listen Now tab. As mentioned, our book of the month is Do Less, a revolutionary approach to time and energy management for busy moms by Kate Northrup. Dr. Mike had the distinct honor to interview Kate for our podcast, and it can be heard in the month of April through the many channels our podcast is available on: iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or through our website at www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com. The product of the month is one of BYWG's truly unique, truly premium supplements, Probiotic Power. Probiotic Power is a shelf-stable, comprehensive probiotic with a whopping 25 billion CFUs in each capsule, meaning it's very potent, and includes 9 of the most beneficial bacterial strains from the Lactobacillus and Bifidobacter families. For the month of April, the 10% discount code is capital PORBIOTIC, capital POWER 10. In the archives of our podcast on our website, you can listen to the comprehensive review of all 8 of our supplements, and in the month of April, one podcast release will be solely dedicated to Probiotic Power. Enjoy the upcoming podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. I'm your co-host today, Dr. Mike Akinfora, and today I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Jennifer Fugo. Jennifer, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's the Skype gods were laughing at us as I don't do many interviews in the office. But we finally, and I'm so excited to have you on the show. You're talking about skin and all the things that go with that, and we really have not had many interviews on it, so I'm sure our audience is going to love to hear what you have to say. Folks, I'm going to read Jen's short bio, and then we're going to get right into it. So Jennifer Fugo, MSCNS, is a clinical nutritionist empowering women who've been failed by conventional medicine to beat chronic skin and unending gut challenges. Because she's overcome a long history of gut issues and eczema, Jennifer has empathy and insight into helping her clients discover missing pieces and create doable integrative plans. Simply put, Jennifer believes that you deserve better. That's why she's launched Skinterrupt. That's www.skinterrupt.com to interrupt the failed conversation about chronic skin problems with helpful alternatives that you aren't being told about. She has a master's degree in human nutrition from the University of Bridgeport and is a certified nutrition specialist. Her work has been featured on Dr. Oz, Reuters, Yahoo, CNN, and many podcasts and summits. Jennifer is an Amazon best-selling author and host of the Healthy Skin Show. That was a mouthful, and I fumbled it all the way through, but we got to the goal line.
That's all that matters.
Oh, my goodness. So, Jennifer, what we ask when people come on the show is tell us your backstory. I mean, you didn't come into this world as a practitioner, but you were actually a patient. Can you give our audience a little peek behind that curtain?
Absolutely. I began my journey as somebody in their late 20s who had no idea why she wasn't feeling well. So I had chronic diarrhea for about 12 plus years, really bad, stinky, room clearing gas. My husband would joke that something must have died inside of me. And so, I came from an Italian family, so I thought that, I just had stomach problems and that was normal and that was the thing that everybody had. And after a while of not being able to wake up with any energy in the morning, even after sleeping 11 hours, I soon realized that I was not feeling like someone who was 27 years old. I felt like, and I love all my elderly folks and friends, but I was really feeling kind of elderly in that moment. And I recognized that that was not normal and began seeking answers for that. And so long story short, found a nutritionist and came to realize that I actually had a lot of gut problems. I learned that I had different sensitivities to food, one being gluten, which was a big shocker because I was Italian and eating a lot of gluten. And with time, eventually I was able to overcome that. If you fast forward a number of years, when I went to grad school, very stressful time. I was close to my final year of school. I began to have a lot of blood sugar problems. And, you know, that's not surprising. Stress can do a lot of really crazy things to your body. And all of a sudden, I also noticed that I was getting these they almost look like crystal beads underneath the skin of my fingers. And I'd never seen them there before. And eventually, and this was in the summertime, that area became very inflamed, super itchy, and eventually started to ooze as those little beads burst. I had no idea what the heck that was. I thought maybe, I was like, is it poison ivy? I've never had that before. I had no clue what was going on. And my dad is a doctor, and he looked at it and he's like, no, it's some sort of dermatitis. He's like, here's some, steroid cream. Just don't use a whole lot of it and see if that'll get rid of it. Well, it did. But then it came back and it got worse. And I used the cream, went away, and then it came back and it spread. And now it's spreading up my fingers, down my palm. It's going into the webbing of all my hands. It's starting to go up around the fingertips. I mean, it got to the point where I could not function in daily life. I couldn't even open a door handle. I couldn't put my hands under water because the water burned so badly. Went to the dermatologist. She looks at my hands. Of course, I had done some Googling, and I said, I think I have dyshidrotic eczema. She's like, you're right, you do. I said, all right, well, what do you want me to do about this? Well, just use the steroid cream, and then you could put some Vaseline on top of it to keep the moisture barrier secure, and it'll keep, your skin from drying out. I was like, you want me to put Vaseline on my hand? I mean, aside from that being utterly impractical, that's a petroleum derivative that I'm not really comfortable with that. She's like, well, I don't know what to tell you then. Maybe just wear gloves, which was what I was already doing. I was buying gloves from Home Depot. Well, long story short, after I had to quit some of the jobs that I was doing because I used to teach cooking classes, I could no longer do that because I could no longer handle food. People were uncomfortable eating food made by somebody whose hands were oozing and looked like that. Even though I would wear gloves when I would make the food, people wouldn't shake my hands anymore because they thought that I had some sort of disease that they didn't want. I got to the point where I became very depressed. And my husband finally said to me, look, if you were a client and you walked into your own office, what would you do to help you? And that was where my journey really started. I went online, I started to look and came to realize that a lot of the information out there was very vague and general. It wasn't all that helpful. A lot of it didn't work. And I started digging into research and built a protocol for myself that I can say as of this point, my skin is completely clear. I have not had any eczema rashes in the last year at all. And in fact, it's been longer than that. So about a year ago, as of like April 2018, I had said that I felt about 85% in remission. My nails were still really damaged, but they are no longer that way. And while I do still keep my steroid cream up in the medicine cabinet, just the back of my head, it gives me a little bit of comfort. I have not had any issues, and I make a point to really take care of my hands now a little bit more so than I would, just because I know what it's like to live in that hell of having rashes that control every facet of your life and really put a kink in it. So,
well, that is a heck of a story, and it is really true of most of us that are in the healthcare space today, that it's usually something with ourself or a loved one that triggers our need to help others. Mm-hmm. And to explore and And who better now than to help others than somebody who knows the acute pain of going through that? That's brilliant.
It is. And I also think, too, that there's a very distinct lack of empathy in a lot of dermatology. I'm not entirely certain on why. I understand because my father's a physician and a surgeon, the whole standard of care and insurance company. I get all that. My dad complains about it all the time, so I understand it well. But what I don't understand is when you see a mother bring her baby in who's covered head to toe in rashes, this poor child is screaming, can't sleep. How does that not make you want to do something different? That's what I don't understand. And so for me, once I got better, it was about a year of watching what was happening. I was in these Facebook groups and I thought, this isn't right. These people should know the same things that I've found out. And I would try and share it in the groups, but because there was no articles to point to, people weren't sharing the research. They weren't even looking at it. They're just throwing darts in the dark. I thought, I have to do something. And so it's because I have that empathy. I know what it's like, but I just don't think in this day and age that it is right anymore that people have to go through this unendingly. So it's one of my big goals to not only help people find answers, but also to, in a sense, to kind of change the way that conventional dermatology is even viewing these conditions so that maybe we can integrate in some of these alternatives to help people more.
Cool. So I thought up a couple questions I just want to go over with you. So what, in what you see today, what are some of the hidden root causes that underlie these chronic skin conditions?
What's interesting is that there is I had said 15. About a year ago, there's 15 root causes for skin rashes. Now I'm saying there's 16. Because I've done more research and I keep learning and there's more things coming out. And, some of these, there's overlap. Like we could say, for example, microbiome. So the gut is one, but I like to actually break that into two. So gut dysfunction, that includes how we digest and absorb our food. And then we've got microbiome dysbiosis, and that can actually affect not just the colon, because that's where our microbiome should really live in the gut, but also the microbiome on our skin as well. I consider diet and food reactions to be a little bit of a separate one as well. We've got genetics, environmental toxins, heavy metals, unmanaged stress, even past traumas, like really traumatic events, things like I lived through 9/11, maybe someone else, you had your father pass away suddenly or were in a horrific car crash. Anything like that could be a root cause, for sure. Hormone imbalances, thyroid issues, mitochondrial dysfunction, autoimmunity and autoinflammation, nutritional deficiencies, environmental allergies, and another big one, this was my most recent addition, was actually drug reactions. So. All
right. Hold on one second. People who listen to the podcast know that I like to write. So
you're taking notes. I love it.
You were flying.
I'm sorry. I'm so passionate about this. And one of the cool things is that there's so much research out there that's not making it into the doctor's offices. And I understand a big reason as to why, but I love sharing this stuff and I love making it palatable and really easy for people who don't have a medical background and love being a part of a team. And so, for me, like even the drug reactions piece to why why either a skin condition can be initially triggered or it can be an ongoing issue. I was like mind blown. I mean, I know that we can react to anything. We can react to natural things. But the drug reactions one, especially with psoriasis, is really interesting. And I should also say that it's usually not just one thing that someone will have. They may have anywhere from 3 to 5 of these specific issues. And that can be why you might have the same symptoms as somebody else, like red, itchy skin that in the wintertime dries up and cracks. Or that maybe you have a histamine issue with this, but either way, you've got 3 to 5 different things. So what might cause your issues might not be somebody else's combo of root causes. And that's oftentimes where I'll see like a client's protocol be pretty different than someone else's. And I just want to specify that because I think a lot of times it's easy to go online and say, oh, well, they did that. That should work for me. And then they're very disappointed in the end. And it's like, well, it doesn't always quite work that way because maybe they have a heavy metal issue and they're dealing with that, but you don't.
Absolutely. Hey, Jen, when, in looking at some of your writings, you have a term that I've never seen before. I've heard of leaky gut, but I've never heard of leaky skin. What does that mean?
Well, it makes me chuckle a little bit. I had never heard of it either. Believe it or not, until about 2 years ago, I was like, leaky skin? What is that? It sounds horrible. But basically, when you think of the gut, it's a similar state in which the gut barrier becomes permeable. And so in the case of the skin, I like to think of our skin as like the shingles on your house, right? So you've got this roof on your house that's supposed to protect the inside of the body, so to speak, or of your belongings, supposed to protect you and your belongings, from the elements. And we have these shingles that are like skin cells that are stacked in a certain way. It's like a brick wall almost. And then you have different proteins and things that are interlaced in between that help create this sort of matrix, essentially. And believe it or not, a leakiness can occur in the skin barrier from a number of different reasons, but a big one is there's a gene, it's called filaggrin, and it actually governs those little junctions, the permeability essentially of the skin and the junctions between all of those cells and how they are essentially sealed. And when the production of filaggrin gets disrupted, so whether you have a SNP in that gene, which about 30% of people with eczema, for example, have that, and it seems to be more prevalent in people with hand eczema, but just having internal inflammation as well as, and I've talked to a few doctors, dermatologists about this as well, but almost like a mechanical inflammation. So like scratching and itching, right? That uncontrollable scratching, that creates an inflammation in and of itself. And so that creates this perpetual state of disruption within the skin barrier. And as a result, we start to see this breakdown of being able to retain moisture and whatnot. And so your skin becomes very unhappy.
Interesting. I've never heard it put that way. So what's your take on food sensitivity triggering these skin rashes?
Well, I'm glad that you asked because, as I said, diet and food reactions is one of the skin rash root causes. And you can certainly, I want to specify, there's a lot of people call things food sensitivities. Some things are actually allergies, whereas other are intolerances. So histamine, for example, is certainly one of the groups, we'll say, that you should consider as a potential trigger. But if you have an issue with it, it's actually an intolerance, not a sensitivity. Salicylates are another class of phytochemicals that can cause issues. But believe it or not, that sensitivity, so to speak, is not an issue within your gut, like, say, gluten would be. It's actually an issue with your liver having difficulty processing salicylates. The most famous of those is aspirin. A lot of people are familiar with aspirin, but the active constituent of aspirin, which is a salicylate, is found in many different very healthy foods. And so a lot of times what can be helpful to support the liver pathways, specifically the glycine pathway, is glycine and B6. There's other nutrients as well. But aside from that, if we're just looking at individual food sensitivities, so gluten, for example, or dairy or eggs, there does seem to be a higher percentage of people, at least with eczema, who have difficulty with eggs, specifically chicken eggs, not necessarily the other types of eggs. Like, I don't have any issue with duck eggs, but you give me a chicken egg and I'm going to have major problems. But some people do have a problem with the other types of eggs as well. It's worthwhile to investigate that and take them out and see if it could help. But a lot of times people assume that food sensitivities, when they've been frustrated at the dermatologist, that it's got to be a food, and that's all it is, and that's where they sort of end up staying. And what they don't understand is that food sensitivities, at least from my experience with gut issues and the overlap that has with skin issues, are really more of a symptom than they are a root cause. Because aside from gluten, which is the only protein that has a capacity, at least from our clinical research, to increase gut permeability or leaky gut, the rest of them don't do that. So something had to happen in order for the gut to become permeable. Sure, you could have, like I was eating a lot of gluten. Sure, I was under a lot of stress. But a lot of people, most people have some level of gut dysbiosis where maybe they have way too much E. coli, or they have too much candida, or they have gut infections, or they're not processing food the way. They're swallowing their food way too fast before chewing it fully. They don't have enough stomach acid, so they're not breaking it down enough. Maybe they don't have enough digestive enzymes, and maybe they don't even have a gallbladder. And so you create this situation where you essentially start feeding bugs in your gut that you shouldn't, and it creates a really sort of toxic environment. It's difficult for your liver to deal with the burden that those, because all of those bugs in the gut produce waste, some more toxic than others, and your liver is tasked with dealing with that. But it also creates that state of leakiness and inflammation in the gut as well. And so while, yes, I do think you should take food sensitivities out, if you just stop at food sensitivities, you're likely going to get stuck on an increasingly smaller diet as a result, because they're just trying to tell you that something is wrong with the way that your body is processing and assimilating food and helping to interface between itself and the microbiome. There's a disconnect and an imbalance there that needs to be addressed. But just taking out the food itself, sure, you feel better in the short term. Sure, you reduce the inflammation, but you can't put those foods back in. And that can be a real challenge. And so I found that it's pretty common when we do gut testing, even in clients with skin rash issues who don't have any gut symptoms, they have a lot of dysbiosis and infections that they never knew about, would have never guessed. And so it is worthwhile to take a look under the hood and dig deeper on that, because of the relationship between the microbiome within the gut and the skin.
Cool. I want to stay on foods for a second, and I want to flip it. So what are some of the favorite foods that you talk about for folks that are struggling with rashes?
Well, I love collagen, number one, assuming you can handle that and you don't have an issue. Like histamine, sometimes some of these products like the bone broth, proteins, and collagen can sometimes be an issue. Not always, but I love collagen supplements. I really, really love beets, but that's assuming that you don't have a salicylate issue. I love oatmeal is great. Gluten-free oatmeal, it's got to be certified gluten-free. Otherwise, it's definitely not gluten-free. I also would say too, so I'm a big fan of trying to keep one's diet as varied as possible. Because there's so many different, it gets a little different with straight gut issues. We could say, oh, well, there's the functional medicine, Institute for Functional Medicine has their elimination diet, and they have very specific foods. The problem with skin is that there are so many different triggers. There could be citrus, it can be this. So while I could say, well, I love beets, but, well, I love this, but, they all have a but, because so many people who have skin rashes, it is a very unique combination, and where you have to say, okay, well, what are you doing now that seems to work and what hasn't worked, and then start digging from there. And that can oftentimes you can help figure out what you need to pull out. I will just say, if someone who's listening has a lot of issues with itchiness, like real intense itchiness that you cannot stop, it does improve with like Benadryl, for example, or antihistamines, I would highly recommend that you avoid the fermented foods. I know that everybody's like, they're really good for you. Well, I've talked to plenty of people and experts and friends of mine who are very knowledgeable in fermented foods, and fermented foods, while they are good for you, can cause major histamine exposure. And so that even includes vinegars. And so you then have to look at all your condiments, soy sauces, that kind of thing. I would also argue too that you might want to avoid things like cured meats and certain cheeses and like hard cheeses, aged foods as well, including wines and whatnot. I know it stinks, but it doesn't necessarily have to be forever. But if you want to decrease the itchiness, that's one of the first really easy ways to do that. And if that's then not working, then it's taking things up a notch to say, okay, do we need to add in additional enzyme support? Do we need to add in some like actual histamine support within the body with things like quercetin and nettles? We're just, you kind of take it step by step to sort through where the diet may be going wrong or causing problems, because my worst fear is for somebody to end up on a very limited diet and they're just like feeling horrible and they're very undernourished.
Gotcha. One of the other things you don't like is coconut oil on the skin.
No.
Why is that?
No, there's actually 3 reasons why. And so to be entirely honest with you, I used to love coconut oil and I thought that it was the greatest thing ever. I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And, about a year and a half ago, I was interviewing Karan Krishnan. And he said to me, we were talking about applying probiotics to the skin and how that could be a useful thing for certain people to help reestablish that balance of the microbiome there. And I was like, okay, well, what will you use? Like coconut, you put some coconut oil first. And he said, no, don't use coconut oil. I was like, why? So he went and told me that they had done this study where they've actually taken bacteria, tons of bacteria that comes from our skin, and applied coconut oil, and it killed all of it. And he's like, look, if the person has dysbiosis of the skin, which if you have rashes, you have dysbiosis of the skin, the last thing you want to do is wipe everything out, because you create a vacuum that allows other opportunistic bugs to come in. And that's really problematic. So it's way too antimicrobial, number one. Number 2, it's also too saturated. So the molecules are so large they can't really penetrate the skin barrier. That makes it feel like you've got this saran wrap layer on top of your skin that can't really be absorbed. And some people will also notice that their skin then feels hot as a result, because the heat is being trapped inside of it. And then last but not least, it's actually too alkaline of a substance, because your skin's pH should be somewhere between 4.5 to 5.5. And coconut oil is closer to like 8. And that is, for people who don't know, they go, well, it doesn't sound that far. It actually is a big jump. And so we don't want our skin to be alkaline. We actually want our skin to be on the acidic side. And that is what helps us control the microbiome population at the skin's level.
Cool. The active ingredient, coconut oil, is monolaurin.
Mm-hmm.
And that is super powerful.
Yes.
Not just antimicrobial, antiviral, antifungal, I think antiparasitic as well. It is really, really strong.
It is. And I mean, I have a whole blog about it on my website for anybody really interested in digging deeper into that. And what was most surprising to me, I thought I was going to get a lot of hate about it. And I did. Some people were like, wait, hold on. Every blog I've ever read on all these wellness websites have said, use coconut oil in your skin. And then I read this, and I don't know what to do now, because you've got a lot of good points here for why I shouldn't do this. And then I had other people start commenting as if they were just waiting for the opportunity for somebody to openly acknowledge this. Well, I did try coconut oil, and it actually made my skin worse. So I've had this deluge of people who have shared that coconut oil has made their skin worse. They've had histamine-like reactions and allergic-type reactions that they thought were something else. It was actually the coconut oil. I mean, there's been a whole slew of problems, and that's why I'm not anti-coconut oil. I don't think it's a bad thing, but maybe we've gone a little too far in assuming that this one really healthy thing is good for everything.
Right. One size does not fit all, for sure.
Exactly.
For sure. You've gone through this, and can you speak to like the shame that you felt and negative feelings that people often get when they've been dealing with skin issues for a long time?
Well, one of the things that even now makes me both really sad and angry is that when you don't have skin issues and maybe you don't have a child, so you don't really have any direct connection to this, these types of conditions, it's very difficult for people to empathize a lot of the times with you and what you're going through. And there's this assumption, like I would get people who were very well-meaning, but they would say, you're just using the wrong moisturizer. Maybe your soap's bad. You don't know how to wash your hands. Like, apparently I was just like the dummy and didn't know what I was doing. They couldn't fathom why what they were doing had no effect on their skin, and yet everything that I was doing seemed to make everything worse. And, maybe my diet was too strict, because at the time, and I want to be very clear with people, before the eczema started, I was gluten, dairy, and egg free. I had been so for years. So that's another reason that I think has shaped my thoughts around whether we should be so strict about food sensitivities and worry about them so much. But it makes you feel like you want to disappear from life. It really does. Like the stares. Like I had people who would just like be mid handshake, like on their way to the handshake, and they would like, they were trying to find a way to bail out of the handshake because they didn't want to touch me.
Yeah.
And it really hurts.
Sure.
And, and so I'm in these Facebook groups still, and at least once a week, I will see someone who's writing something to the effect like, I'm basically about ready to end my life because I can't bear the pain. I can't sleep. No one understands. Everything I eat makes me sick. I don't know what to do. My doctors are of no help. And so back in January, there was this article that came out that detailed some really interesting statistics. I was actually in JAMA Dermatology, and they had looked at more than 300,000 people with eczema. They found that 44% were more likely to have suicidal thoughts, and 36% were more likely to attempt suicide.
Wow.
And, it's not just, I know that I dealt with eczema, but I work with clients who have psoriasis, seborrheic dermatitis, rosacea, etc. And like, for example, with psoriasis, there's a 20% increase risk of suicide, and it's actually more prevalent in people who are younger. So as you age, you're not as likely to commit suicide, but it's just sad. And what is even more disturbing is 1 in 8 people who did commit suicide had seen their doctor about their rashes within a month before doing so. And that article was so disturbing. It came out in January, and it was gone. Like, it didn't make major news. It just disappeared. And so, nobody in this world is shocked or horrified when you've had it. You understand you can go to some really dark places. But I think that's why it's really important to know that you're not alone. No matter what, you're not alone. There are people that understand what you're going through, and there is a way out. I certainly don't want to ever promote false hope because, it took me a long time. It took me a year to really turn things around when I was working on it. And for 6 months, I saw no improvement. And I really had no idea if what I was doing was just wasting my money and my time and just being, silly and, just wishful thinking. But I'm glad that I stuck with it, and I'm glad that I looked deeper. And you have to give it time. The skin is the last organ on the totem pole of priorities. And so a lot of times people have a number of different things going on underneath that are out of balance. It just so happens that the way it shows up is in their skin. And so in order for the skin to improve, you have to address those first. And that's why the journey can feel really long. And just so everybody knows, in case you've been considering going the more quote unquote natural route, I call it the scenic route. And I'm saying that with love and kindness. It is a scenic route. It takes a longer time, and you have to be aware of that. It's not like a cortisone cream. It's not just going to make you feel better within 3 days. But I also don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater and entirely say conventional dermatology is worthless. I don't think that at all. I think that there's a lot that we can benefit from having both. I still used my topical steroid when I was going through my eczema issue because I needed to keep the itching at bay. I needed to sleep. So I think if we find creative ways forward that look deeper, we offer someone a much greater chance of success in the end.
Awesome. Jen, I want to thank you for your time today. We're running short as I'm actually seeing patients right now. And you did mention previously that you had a free gift for our audiences, and we love free gifts. So
awesome.
What were you thinking?
Yeah, so I have a really great little ebook that gives you 7 of my eczema soothing smoothies. And actually, it doesn't actually matter what type of skin issue you have, and you can go download that. I'm sure you'll share the link in the show notes.
Sure.
And there are smoothies you can make for breakfast. They're protein packed and nutrient rich that will really help rebuild your skin.
Awesome. Jen, is there anything else you'd like to share with our tribe today?
I just want to thank you all so much for tuning in. And, if you're really interested in this chronic skin rash issue, come check out my podcast, The Healthy Skin Show, where we dive into all of this stuff with research and just tons of information you're not going to find elsewhere. It's a really great resource for everybody.
Awesome. And folks, we'll have this all in the show notes because there really is not a lot of people doing what Jennifer is doing, nor have they gone through what she's gone through. So she really is going to do everything she can to try and help you, to help yourself to live your best life. So Jen, I want to, again, thank you for coming on the show today. And folks, if you like what you heard, please go to iTunes and leave a review because it helps us help others find this really super important work that we're doing. So we'll see you next time, folks. Ciao.